Welcome to my shop. My name is Rachel Gingell. Today my dad and I are going to rebuild the engine on this 4 to 8N tractor. The techniques that I demonstrate will apply to an 8N with either a front or side distributor as well as a 9N or 2N tractor. I will show you every step in the engine rebuild process. So if that's something you want to perform on your own tractor, go ahead and follow along. At the end, you'll have the confidence to do a rebuild on your own N-Series Ford tractor. Your very first step is to remove the ground battery cable and then your hot battery cable. It's important that you do them in that order. If your battery has a clip or a tray that holds it in, you'll want to take that out of the way. If not, you can just lift your battery right out of the tractor. On this side, I'm also going to turn off the gas here at the sediment bowl. I'm getting ready to take the hood off of the tractor. So the bolts up here hold the hood on. 2 bolts down there at the dog legs help to pinch it in. Unfortunately, my grill has been welded onto the hood, so I can't remove the grill, but typically you would do that to free up the hood some more. With those bolts removed, your cap for your radiator off, and then these screws removed here by the air breather, you should be able to free up your hood. Also, if you have headlights, you'll want to disconnect the wire for the headlights and make sure that your gas line is free. But with all of that, then you should be able to remove the hood. I'm going to take these screws off here to remove the rest of this screen for my air cleaner. Now, the reason that I am rebuilding the engine on this tractor is because it had a loss of power, it smoked really bad, and then it lost compression. You can run a simple compression test on all of the cylinders of your tractor to determine that it does indeed have a loss of compression to help you decide if an engine rebuild is appropriate for your tractor or if you need some other kind of repair on your tractor. But with those symptoms, the low oil pressure, the smoking, and the loss of power all combined together, that confirms to me that this tractor does need an engine rebuild. This is probably a pretty tired tractor. It looks like it's gotten a lot of use and a lot of love. With that freed up, I am ready to go ahead and lift the hood off the tractor, which I'm going to get some help with because the gas tank does stay with the hood. It can be a little bit heavy. It's important that you drain both your radiator and your engine oil. There's a plug right here for your radiator to leak your coolant, and then there's one plug in the bottom of the oil pan, that's for your oil. Make sure my bucket's a little off-centered. I'm going to loosen this up. Always wear safety glasses when you do this step because you don't want to get coolant in your eye. There you go. On this side of the engine, you'll want to disassemble several pieces. You can start with the manifold and exhaust. Leave the carburetor attached to your manifold, and you can just use those bulge sockets on the back to take off at your choke and throttle linkage on your carburetor. And you'll use that same technique on the governor as well, and you can just pull the governor rod completely out of there. Make sure to remove either your alternator or generator, whatever your tractor is equipped with, as well as your upper and lower radiator tubes and your oil filter line towards the front of the tractor. For the steering arms, you'll want to take the first arm off here at the tie rod. There's a bolt on the bottom. There could be a cotter key that you'll want to remove first. And then once that bolt on the bottom is removed, then you can use a pry bar and a hammer to pound that off. Be careful because it could spring back at you. And then for the radius arm, detach it at the bell housing and leave it affixed to the axle. That'll help you once you make the split for your tractor to help you maintain control of the front side of the tractor. On this side of the tractor, you want to remove your radius arms and tie rods the same way as you did on the other side. You have 2 lines that come into your oil filter canister. Remove the lines first and then take the 2 bolts off of the top that hold the canister onto the head of the engine. On the front, you have 6 frame bolts that bolt the front piece of the engine onto the oil pan. You want to remove those. Before doing so, make sure that the back or belly of your tractor is properly jacked up. I just used a jack to raise up the front, slide my blocks underneath, let it back down, and make sure that that's very secure. We don't want to have any accidents here while we are splitting the tractor. Once the front of your tractor is free, you can just use those arms to steer the tractor forward and out of the way for now. You want to take your starter off of the tractor because those two bolts that you take off hold the starter together and attach to the frame. Once you have your starter off, you want to try to hold it together and then just put a nut on the end, a 5/16 nut, so that you can hold your starter together and it doesn't come apart while you're working on the rest of the tractor. Remove your battery tray to expose 2 more bolts here, and then remove the rest of the bolts around the belly of the tractor here. Hook up a cherry picker. I put 1 bolt through the oil filter canister holder and another bolt on the other side here where the manifold goes. With that, my cherry picker is secure and it's tight, you can see, and then I'm ready to just pry it off. I'm using a screwdriver or a pry bar in between here to gently pull this apart. Go all the way, just like that. I am taking the pressure plate off as well as the clutch disc. We got 1 more up there. And the flywheel. I'm taking all these pieces off so that I can set my engine onto a stand. We chose to put our engine onto a stand so that we can do a more thorough engine rebuild. We're gonna replace the clutch and the ring gear and the rear main seal, main bearings, etc. And we have to put the engine on a stand in order to do that. If you don't have an engine stand and you want to just simply freshen up the engine, you could leave your engine in frame. You don't have to take it out. You are limited as to what you can do. At that point, you can really only do valves, rod bearings, new pistons and sleeves. But if that's going to be sufficient for your engine, then you could just leave it right in place instead of taking it out like I have chosen to do so. I'm going to take the rest of my head bolts off, and then I will go ahead and remove the head. Got my nut stuck in there. Let me try to get it out. When I'm removing the head, I can gently tap onto it right here on this portion of the head, but not on the neck, because that's a little bit more fragile than the rest. That one's coming. It was just the tightest of them all. I think this one is my last one. There we go. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and take this off. Want to come help me, Dad?
Sure.
Okay.
All right, see if we can loosen it.
Notice how I'm just tapping here. We're going to use a little bit of a pry bar. Loosen up on this side. I don't see it moving
on the
at all.
block, there's a little bit of a boss right here that's casted in, so it's a good place to pry right here. And again, like Rachel said, we don't want to bang on this and break it, because this is hollow. It's a hollow head and water runs through it. On an 8N Ford, they have bolts on the late model 8N rather than studs. Unfortunately, this has studs, so it makes it a lot harder to get it over the studs.
Oh man, it's got so close. There you go. When we took the head off the engine, we did a quick visual inspection to see if we could identify where the problem was on this engine. Things we're looking for would be a loose piston.
Yeah, real loose in the bore, real heavy ridge. There's nothing like that here.
Sure, and we would always inspect the valves as well, and I don't see any that are particularly burnt out. They look okay. The head gasket didn't seem damaged.
Yeah, what we're gonna find is when we flip this over, I'm hoping when we take the pan off, we really find the problem down there.
We found the reason why this engine had no oil pressure. You can see that this oil pickup tube here is loose. That will cause it to only draw air and never draw oil, causing no oil pressure. When you are ready to rebuild your very own tractor, you'll need some parts. The parts on the table in front of me are some of the parts that we offer that you may need. First is a new water pump if you decide you want to replace yours. Next, we do offer both the filler cap, which has the breather element inside of it, or if your cap is okay and you just want to replace the breather element, we offer that separately. You should purchase one or the other, not both of them. Main bearings are sold here as a complete set. Rod bearings are sold individually. So if you want to put new rod bearings in your entire engine, make sure you order a quantity of 4. They're sold as a set, like that. We offer a new engine oil dipstick if you want a new one of those, upper and lower radiator hoses as well. And then from here over is our engine rebuild kit. That includes sleeves, pistons and rings, new wrist pin bushings, and then the gaskets, head gasket, oil pan gasket, manifold gaskets, rear and front seals, etc. All of this is offered in a kit, and if you purchase it as the kit, if you can use all these pieces, you'll save a little bit of money, or we offer them individually as well if you don't need everything that is shown here in the engine kit. All of these parts are available on my website, farmtractorrepair.com. At this point, I'm ready to remove my rod bearings. So there is a cap here that's held on by 2 bolts that you can just remove. They're probably going to be tight because it is torqued, and if the person who was in the engine before you did their job right, they will be very tight. So I'm going to remove both of those nuts off of the end here, and then we'll take the cap off to see the shell. We're doing this so that we can determine what size rod bearings we need to replace with. Standard reading on this crankshaft should be 2.094. That's what its standard was from the factory. Now this is going to be worn down, and we make up that difference by putting in different size rod bearings. I'm going to use a piece of wood here to set onto the piston. I'm using wood, not a screwdriver, because if I wanted to reuse these pistons, I wouldn't want to damage them. Just going to lightly tap these down, and that's going to rest there in the bore. I think it's cleared enough so that I can get my cap free. Nope, I need to pound it a little bit more. I'm going to come at it from this side maybe. Just trying to be careful that that piston doesn't fall on me. Okay, ready?
Yep.
There we go. Okay. So let's just set the piston out of the way. I want to talk more about the rod bearings. Okay, so here is how you see how that just pops out. There's a little groove right here. That normally holds the shell bearing into the cap here. So when I take the shell out, then I can typically read on the back what size they are. There'll be little numbers right here. This one says STD, which would mean standard. These are standard rod bearings inside here. But my question is, do I put standard back in, or do I choose a different size? Because rod bearings come in many different sizes. So you determine that by measuring right here. I'm using a digital caliper that has a 3 decimal point readout. So it'll measure a longer number for me. Sometimes people have a digital caliper that just has 2 digits, and that is not suitable. You need a finer measurement here. So I'm reading 2.083. If I measure this way, because it could wear oblong, I get 2.089. So here's the math. If standard is 2.094, the manual says that you can have up to 5 thousandths clearance and still put standard back in. So that would mean that anything between 2.089 to 0.094 would be okay for standard. However, my personal preference isn't to have that much clearance. For something that's a 2-inch measurement, I would normally only recommend a 2 thousandths difference. But that is completely up to you and what your preference is. If I measure this and realize that I'm not between the 2.89 to the 2.094, then I need to take my crankshaft out and have it turned so that I can use 10, 20, or different size rod bearings depending on how worn your crankshaft is. Now it's also important that before you make that decision that you measure your crankshaft at 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. You could get a different measurement at different places. Sometimes people, when they're trying to rebuild an engine on a budget, will just regrind or put in a different size rod bearing on 1 cylinder instead of putting the same size rod bearings on all 4 cylinders. So it's really important that you measure your crankshaft both ways and then determine what size rod bearings you need. If my crankshaft wasn't worn down, then I could just put standards back in if I was within that acceptable clearance. But because mine is worn, and especially back here, the farther I get from the oil pump, the more damaged my crank is, I see more of a need to have my crankshaft turned before I rebuild the engine. We're going to take the pulley off of the front here so that we can get to this cover. There are several bolts around here that should be 9/16 size that we're going to take off. Before you take all of those off though, you need to remove this nut so that you can get to the oil pressure relief valve. So I have that loosened up. This one's 15/16. And we'll pull that out. I have a magnet handy because it might be stuck in there. Should be close. There we go. Okay, so there you can see the spring. Let's pull that out.
And the plunger came with it.
There you go. Okay, you want to take the rest of those bolts off on your side. I think I have them all removed on my. One more down here, and then I think we're loose.
I got one more up here.
Okay, this front cover is gonna pry off hard. So we've got some screwdrivers here so that we can gently pry this off.
You know what?
Close.
You still got a bolt right there. There's a bolt right there.
Oh, that holds the governor on.
Yep.
Okay. There we go.
All right. And what just fell off is the oil slinger. That's kind of important. This oil slinger is on the front and runs inside the cover here. So we got to make sure not to lose that.
This bolt's still a little hung up on there.
Is it?
Yeah, let me get it the rest of the way out. There we go. Okay, I got a hold of it.
Got the line.
Linkage, yeah. There we go. Okay, governor is off next. My next step is to take the main bearings off. For the front main bearing, you can see that the oil pump comes with it. Sometimes on those nuts, there will be wire on top, so make sure that you cut the wire off if needed before you try to remove your main bearings. There's a front main bearing, a center, and then a rear main bearing. You can remove all of those.
That's nice to use.
That's loose.
Yep.
Okay.
The center main has the wear that we have to measure that. That's your crankshaft in play.
Here we go.
The main bearings are nice and gray. They don't look damaged like the rod bearings. Okay, let's see if we can lift it out. You get the front.
I took my valve door covers off to expose the valve train. I have a pry bar inside here, and my dad's gonna pry up on the guide itself. When he does, you can see that that spring closes in just enough that I can reach in here with a pair of pliers and pull this clip off the bottom, just like that, okay? Then,
I'm gonna let go.
Yep, he's gonna let go. Let me say that this clip, you can see, is solid. Some of them have holes, and I would instead use a tool like this one to reach onto that clip instead of pliers, okay? But with that removed, that then allows the whole entire valve to be driven out. So you can see that he's just putting the punch right on the spring, and I can see the guide start to come out. Yeah, it's definitely moving. There we go. And so now the whole valve assembly comes out. I'm going to go down the line and do that 8 times.
And here comes the
There we
lifter.
go. Yep, there's the lifter coming out.
Now this tractor has adjustable lifters. You can see the nut in the center, and that's the part that adjusts the gap for our valve clearance. We'll get to that later when we put them back together, but fortunately this tractor, somebody has updated it with adjustable lifters.
With all of the valve lifters removed, the camshaft can now come out. It'll get hung up a couple times. You just gently kind of pull it out the rest of the way. There are no cam bearings on this engine, so we just pull this camshaft out. It's time to take the sleeves out of the engine. I have a sleeve puller like this one underneath in the bottom of my engine that is catching onto the sleeve. So it's pulling the sleeve up. You can see the puller comes and pulls the sleeve right out of the engine. When you hook up your puck onto the bottom, if it just has trouble getting started, you can tap it very gently to help it give that first nudge. I'm using a 1/2 inch threaded rod through my puck, and then it slides all the way out. That sort of puck you could make yourself if you have machinist type tools, or I'm happy to make one for you and send it to you. We just have the size for these N-series engines, and it will pull out either size of sleeves. This is a good idea because it prevents you from damaging the block. Sometimes people will try to pound out their sleeves, and in doing so, they damage the block. So now you can see that my sleeve is pulled out and it's intact. I'm gonna detach my puck and then I'll follow those same steps on the other 3 cylinders. When you take your sleeves out of your tractor, you are going to need to take a measurement before ordering new parts. I have in my hand a thin sleeve and a thick sleeve. This one measures 40 thousandths, this one measures 90 thousandths. To measure yours, you would just use a digital caliper to grab onto it like this, and you can see that I have 0.041. If I was a little tighter, it'd measure the 40 thousandths. This is the thin 40 thousandth sleeve or the 90 thousandth sleeve. On rare occasions, when you take your engine apart, you might find that your engine has no sleeves. In that case, you probably have 90 over pistons, and that is a specialty piston kit. It's not typical. That's a very uncommon for you to find that, but you might find it, so I need to address it. Most of the time, you'll find one of these 2 size sleeves. You need to measure what size sleeve you have so that you can put the same size thickness sleeve back into your block. Now that we have our engine completely disassembled down to the bare block, we're going to take a break and clean the block up, and then we'll be back. Look for video number 2, which will begin the reassembly process.